Dragon Silver, Wizard Gold. Book 1 in the Varthien Saga by Kris Sihto. Chapter 14. Journeys. 661 OM Tarandir. Year of the Tangled Briar. Norman's Tower. "Susie, we need you," Peter called up the stairs. Susie considered ignoring him for a moment, but the boy was bound to get into trouble without supervision. She was feeling lively after the full meal she had eaten, so she wasn't at all perturbed by the sudden demand on her energy. Looking over at the ring on the floor, she was satisfied it was still pumping out magic, and she could go back to feast as much as she wanted later. With an internal sigh, she shifted her form past the door, which Peter had left standing wide open earlier. Untidy. And down the staircase that spiraled down the outer wall of the tower. The boy, it seems, had called up the stairs and then left, expecting her compliance. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she could see the front door stood wide, Peter's back visible in the courtyard, tapping his foot. He had set up the wagon. Ugh, beast of burden time. No please, no thank you, just an expectation. She considered turning around to climb to the workroom again, but Albert had asked her to look after Peter. With another inward sigh, she steeled herself to the task and walked up to the wagon, settling herself down between the yoke shafts. It bothered her a little that Peter had come to see her as little more than transportation, but she consoled herself with the recollection that he had but a week left of this apprenticeship, after which she would get Norman to herself once more. Peter seemed preoccupied, chattering away to the young dragon while he connected the wagon. Only when he had climbed up onto the driver's seat did he direct his attention to her. "We're headed into town, Susie. Ready to go." No manners. She was sure he used to be more polite when he was younger, less inclined to assume her servitude. She glared at him through the stone on the back of her head, but he didn't notice. Probably because her artist hadn't put eyes there, and everyone seemed to expect that her vision was dependent on the shapes carved into her form. She debated the speed at which she would take the path. On the one hand, dawdling would show her displeasure, but on the other hand, speed would get her back home to that delicious ring more quickly. She decided to dawdle. Her calculations suggested the kinetic energy requirements would be greater if she used haste, and it would be poor precedent to waste energy just because she had it. At least the path was less difficult than it used to be, she considered. Ever since Felicity's brush with wild magic, a smooth, almost glassy road had become fused into the landscape, leading directly to the town. Felicity was a strange one, Susie mused. Afraid of everything, incapable of acting, causing herself difficulty by her own actions, and then being incapable of understanding her own faults. If she were not so blitheringly incompetent, she might have made a halfway decent mage, but she had been so fixated on becoming nothing more than a wife and mother that those talents had lain fallow. Susie had tried to get her head around the issue of Felicity for many years now. It remained a puzzle to her why anyone would choose to not develop their magic. She could not, however, fault the effect of the straight path that scarred the terrain, even though Norman found it bothersome that people could now easily come to call upon him. Peter's talents must have arisen from the combined talents of methodical Gareth, an architectural wizard, and ineffectual Felicity, a woman too scared of her own shadow to begin to harness her own power. So, Engineer Peter focused his attention into his hands rather than his power, insisting on mundane solutions and inadvertently locking away his more esoteric talents. Such a waste, thought Susie not for the first time. The things he created had a residual magical charge, showing that there was a trickle of flow, but that was barely more than the natural order, a slight strengthening of the bonds between objects so they needed less maintenance, like that water carrier he jerry-rigged when he was just 12. It should have fallen apart just hours after it was created, rather than holding up for years, with only one piece of string needing to be replaced last year. Barely any flavour in that system. What use was that to her? Susie's train of thought was momentarily broken as Petunia fluttered her way onto a stony shoulder and gave the gargoyle a tiny hug. I love you, Susie. Thank you for taking us to town. Then Petunia flew back to Peter, her train of conversation unstoppable. Perhaps it wouldn't hurt to move a little more quickly.